This episode of Marijuana Today Daily is brought to you by MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our weekly show Marijuana Today, as well as our weekly titles Green Rush and Weed Wonks, all available over at mjtodaypodcast.com, greenrushpodcast.net, and weedwonks.com. If you have a legal marijuana business, service, product, or company that you want to market to the best audience in the legal cannabis industry, zip me an email to shay@mjtodaydaily.com to learn how you can get on our sponsorship calendar. That's shay@mjtodaydaily.com, with Shay spelled S-H-E-A. Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Tuesday, April 6th, 2021, and you're tuned in to episode 1041 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. We return to a well-trodden storyline for today's top story as New York State's legalization of adult-use marijuana continues to bull its way through the cannabis news cycle. Following the signing of the legislation on Wednesday to make adult use very legal in New York, the New York Police Department followed up with an official memo to its officers, informing them of some of the new rule changes that come along with progressive cannabis policy reform, including that they can no longer search people's cars based simply on the smell of marijuana, and that people are free to smoke cannabis anywhere tobacco smoking is allowed, which means it's now perfectly legal to smoke marijuana on New York City streets. Under New York's new legalization system, people will be free to carry up to 3 ounces of cannabis while out and about, while having up to 5 pounds at home. Delivery will be allowed, as will home grow and public consumption spaces. This feels like a huge game changer for national legalization. Pop over to Kyle Yeager's story on this at Marijuana Moment for more. As we always do, we have all the news we cover linked to on our website at mjtodaydaily.com. To New Mexico we go for headline number 2, as that western state is just a short step behind New York in casting off its own marijuana prohibition laws. Right now, we're just waiting on Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham to sign off on the legislation passed last week by legislators during the special session called by Governor Grisham herself. So it's only a matter of when this week that we'll see the whole thing buttoned up. The new legislation will set up a taxed and regulated sales program complete with social equity provisions. Home grow will be allowed, with sales set to start sometime next spring. Kyle has another good pickup on this, and his story is worthy of a full dive in, no matter where you do your business. Rounding out the day's top stories brings us to Washington, D.C., where late last week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer spoke with a reporter from Politico and said that Democrats would be pushing for federal legalization legislation this year, even if President Biden was not supportive of the idea, which it's generally held that he's not. Senator Schumer has been rather loud about marijuana reform being a major political priority for the Democratic Party, having earlier this year teamed up with Senators Cory Booker of New Jersey and Ron Wyden of Oregon to build cannabis legislation. And the ongoing legalization of marijuana in Senator Schumer's home state of New York is certainly to catalyze things even further. It feels like federal legalization could actually happen this year. Ignore this storyline at your own professional peril. Those are the top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz it in headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor, MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our weekly show, Marijuana Today, as well as our weekly titles, Green Rush and Weed Wonks, all available over at mjtodaypodcast.com, greenrushpodcast.net, and weedwonks.com. When you become a sponsor of our work here at MJ Today Media, your marketing message is put before a group of listeners made up of exactly the right kind of people that you want to reach. I'm talking people who own dispensaries, entrepreneurs, investors, regulators, activists, bud tenders, and cultivators. The people who tune into our shows are the people who are making this whole cannabis thing happen, and they live all over the country, so if you need national reach, look no further. We can work with budgets of all size, so it doesn't matter if you have $100 a month to invest or $10,000. If you have any marketing budget at all, you need to be deploying some of that with us. Email me at shay@mjtodaymedia.com to learn how you can get on our sponsorship calendar. That's shay@mjtodaymedia.com, with Shay spelled S-H-E-A. All right, time for the Blitz. Legal adult use marijuana in Mexico is ever so closer to becoming a reality, with a bill casting off prohibition being approved yesterday by a Senate committee, setting up the legislation to go before two more committees ahead of a final vote by the full Senate later this month. The legalization bill has already cleared the lower house of deputies, so it would go to Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador for his signature, assuming that the final vote in the Senate goes the right way. If you're not familiar with the particulars of Mexico's proposed adult use program, this story would be an excellent starting point for you to get caught up. As we always do, we have all the news we cover linked to on our website at mjtodaydaily.com. Legal adult use sales in the state of Illinois were up big in March, totaling $109 million, which breaks the previous monthly record set in January of $88 million. Of that $109 million total, around one-third came from out-of-state visitors, who poured $31 million into Illinois that could very well have been spent in their own states, if their own states didn't have such backwards cannabis laws. That is certainly one of my favorite parts of how Illinois shares its stats. Not only are they breaking records, but they're doing so right in the faces of their frumpy prohibitionist neighbors. Onward and upward. Florida-based operator Trulieve is buying up Pennsylvania marijuana company Keystone shops in a deal totaling $60 million, split out at $20 million in cash and $40 million in stock. The move gives Trulieve a giant footstep into the Pennsylvania medical cannabis market, with 3 dispensaries open in Philadelphia, and is expected to close in the second quarter of this year. Nevada operator Planet 13 just released its latest fiscal results with Q4 and full year 2020 numbers. For the final quarter of last year, Planet 13, which operates its flagship retail store out of Las Vegas, pulled in $20 million in revenue, a jump of 22% on the year, with a net loss of $2.9 million and an adjusted EBITDA of $300,000. Down from last year's figure of $2.6 million. For the full year, Planet 13 realized revenues of $70.5 million, up 11% from the previous year, a net loss of $7.9 million, and an adjusted EBITDA of $8.9 million, down a touch from the previous year's $10.2 million. Keeping the news dial pegged to Nevada, we have multi-state operator Jushi Holdings announcing that it has finalized its previously announced deal to acquire the medical and adult use cannabis company Franklin Bioscience. The $9 million acquisition gives Jushi new cultivation, processing, and distribution capabilities in the state. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser spoke with local news station WAMU late last week and said that city officials were ready to implement legal marijuana rules just as soon as the federal government gets out of the way. Regular listeners should remember that the federal government has an outsized influence on how the city of D.C. does a lot of things, and has been holding it back from allowing for legal cannabis for years, driven mainly by obstructionist prohibitionary Republican lawmakers. Last month, the Government Accountability Office ruled that even though current federal prohibitions on D.C. expanding legalization are still in effect, city lawmakers could do work to set up cannabis legalization just as long as they didn't actually implement it. So it's under that environment that Mayor Bowser made her comments last week. We end the day on a very fun note with someone in Colorado's state government having the brilliant idea to auction off cannabis-themed vanity plates with the proceeds to go to charity. Right now, there are a number of special vanity plates like hash, bong, herb, and indica all up for grabs, with bidding open until the fitting date of April 20th. All the funds raised from the auction will go towards the Colorado Disability Funding Committee, which awards grants to local groups working on things that benefit the disabled community. Right now, the license plate Is It 420 is the leader in terms of total bid amount, with 63 bids driving the price up to $6,440. Pop on over to read this one and to check out the full list and all the current prices yourself. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again tomorrow with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, MJ Today Media, and to our awesome patron listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the patron listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with Marijuana Today.
One take, Shay. One take.